Okay, that was just delightful to see. And just to introduce myself, I'm David Smith. I'm Nancy's son. I want to thank everybody who's here in person and here online. Nancy is Dick's second wife, and I'm her son. And it's just a couple of quick things. The agenda today is I'm going to just reflect a little bit. We'll have a eulogy by Rodney. We'll have a couple of people from online, Paul Lukoff and Keith Cohen, also talk about their remembrances of Dick. And I just wanted to say a couple things that, of course, my mom and Dick got together because Dick's wife, Jackie, passed away young, and my dad, Barry, passed away young, and that was very, very sad. But it was very nice that they were able to meet each other and build something very joyous that made my life richer, and I think all of our lives richer by combining and melding two families together. A couple little anecdotes about my remembrance of Dick. My mom met Dick through JDate online, and their first date was to Max's Opera Cafe. My mom called me up and said, I went on a date with this guy, and you won't guess what he ordered for his meal. He ordered matzo ball soup. And I goes, well, Mom, that's how you know he's Jewish, It's like, Richard Paul, you can't be sure, but he ordered matzo ball soup. So that confirmed it. I knew I had a good impression of him before I even met him. The other little story I'd like to say is that just how charming Dick was he was able to charm all kinds of people. And I particularly warmed my heart at how well he connected with the generation above him. He always was, he was like the favorite person for my wife's grandmother, Babushka Fira, to talk to. She thought he was terrific. He was always asking her about the Soviet Union and her life there. He connected well with my mom's mom, Grandma Shirley. She thought he was terrific too. He was also patient with the younger generation, particularly my children, could be kind of a handful. My last little anecdote is one of the early dates my mom and Dick went on. I think it was the first time he met my sons, probably about age 3 and 6, somewhere around there. And my mom and Dick took them to a park, and they found sticks and were whacking each other. And Dick said, "No, you shouldn't whack each other." So they started whacking Dick with the sticks. And they couldn't quite get around that his name was Dick, so they just called him Mr. Man, and they were whacking Mr. Man with sticks. And I felt, it's like, for somebody who was a public defender, I think he was good with proto criminals. He's just very patient with the miscreants. So although I didn't know Dick until later in life, he just was a very charming and joyful part of my life, and I'm very fortunate to be able to share at least part of his life history. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Rodney for the eulogy.
Thank you, David. How am I sounding out there? And maybe do we see thumbs up in the on Zoom? Is everybody hearing okay? Good. Books, hardcover books, mostly nonfiction, frequently heavy and thick. The Last Lion, The Path to Power by Robert Caro, The Rise and the Fall of the Third Reich by William Shirer, All the President's Men. So many books. We are in the Burlingame Main Library, which I'm told has a collection of about 200,000 books. Dad did not read 200,000 books in his lifetime, but he read a lot. I think you would be hard-pressed to find somebody who read more books in the course of his time, 87 years. But it's not really the quantity of the books my dad read that I think is significant. What really astonishes me is that in the 1970s, the busiest time in his life, he has a private law practice and he's a part-time public defender. So that's like 50, 60 hours, many evenings, Saturdays, working really hard just for that. Also, he's helping my mother raise the 3 of us. And he begins teaching a class in criminal justice at the University of Delaware. And on top of all that, he reviewed dozens of books for the Wilmington News Journal. And think about that. And by the way, he wasn't even paid for the book reviews. All he got to do was keep the books. So why would he do this? What does that tell us? I think it wasn't just reading books. He wasn't just trying to read books. He was trying to really understand them, to really assimilate their information and also connect other readers with those books, because Dick Paul believed that books could shape lives. And he used books to shape my life. So an example, he gave me this book, 5 Seasons by Roger Angell, when I was in high school. And that sparked a passion for baseball that continues to this day. He himself said that his legal career as a criminal law defender was sparked by reading Clarence Darrow for the defense. And so the book reviews were connecting lots of other people with books. This was really important to him. He read on a broad range of subjects, but he had a few that he went particularly deep on. So World War II and the Holocaust, he read everything he could find on that. Israel was a really important subject to him. But I think his favorite subject was another guy named Dick Nixon. He loved reading about Nixon, and he loathed Nixon, the man, but he loved books about Nixon and Watergate. And to go with my dad into a bookstore in Wilmington, Delaware, you would be warmly greeted. Everybody knew him. He had a couple favorite bookstores, Baldwin's Book Barn in Westchester, Pennsylvania, great used bookstore that's still going today. And I think his favorite was 9th Street Books in downtown Wilmington. and that was run by a guy named Jack Buckley. I did not need to look up his name for this. It's seared in my memory. I think Dad was very important to the bottom line of 9th Street Books, and sadly, they closed a few years ago. And the guy who edited the book review page, this is what he said about my dad. He said, Dick Paul must be one of the nation's most voracious readers. In the time it takes others to peruse a book jacket, he could be finished with chapter 1. So throughout his life, he was always, books were his constant companion. He never went anywhere without a book. My dad was born in New York City in 1935 and spent most of his life in Wilmington, Delaware. He grew up with his brother, Charles Paul, always known to us as Spike, Uncle Spike. Sadly, my uncle is not well, and he was not able to join us today, but we send our best to him. Dad was teased for being a reader as a child. He was called a bookworm, and he did not care. He really learned to disregard what other people thought of him if he didn't think it made sense. He was proud to be a reader. He's proud to do a lot of other things that set him apart from other people. Went to Temple University undergrad and for law school. And then at the end of law school, he met my mother, who was a librarian, and they married in 1960. Some of my earliest memories of my dad are going to, my mom worked, she taught Sunday school at the synagogue. And Dad and I would go on adventures on Sundays, and often we would go to the train station, now the Joseph R. Biden train station in downtown Wilmington. My brother Randy was born in 1965, Reid in 1969. Reid, whose name is almost an advertisement for Dad's favorite activity. He had an interesting term of endearment for us. He called us his wombats. And, I guess we were kind of a handful, but I've never heard like anybody else call their kids wombats. And this is also the time when he really took an interest in his Jewish identity. He had grown up in a family that was Reformed, didn't really celebrate all the holidays. And I think it was anti-Semitism that really made my dad want to understand his heritage better. And we went to Oddish Kodesh Synagogue, a conservative synagogue, and he was really proud that we were doing that. In the 1970s, Dad, as I said, was really, really busy. He was in a small, like 4-man law firm in 1972. And one of his partners told him he was going to run for the Senate, young guy. Dad said, "You're crazy, you'll never win." And that guy actually did win. And he continues to serve an elected office to this day. But he's no longer the senator from Delaware. Dad he formed a partnership with Paul Lukoff. We'll be hearing from Paul a little bit later. And I had the privilege of working after school, and during summers, I would come in and do filing in my dad's law firm. And he, I really got to learn a lot about the people he was serving. They were working class, working poor people. Many of the things he was helping them with were some of the darkest experiences of their lives. And I was taught to really, take this really seriously, respect these people. And Dad worked really hard for them, including a lot of people that he was representing as a public defender. So it wasn't something that was making him a lot of money. I have an audio I'm going to try to find from one of Dad's clients who was a young woman who was going through a really difficult divorce. And I talked with her a short time ago about my dad passing, and I'm hoping this will work.
That he was so protective, knowing that I was a young woman in a situation that she did not had a clue, and I had a poor. How could I have married? But again, I have such a wonderful son out of this relationship. And he really guided me to a way where I could be, a whole person to have a new life. That's how he protect and mentor me.
And this is a picture of Rachel with her second husband. When she met Jerome, Dad said he wanted to check him out before she got married, and he gave Jerome the seal of approval, and they've been happily married. They actually live in the south of France now. They had 2 kids of their own, and it's like one of my dad's, I think, proudest things. He didn't stay friends with a lot of his clients because it was really a much more professional relationship. But I think Rachel really tells us about what it was like to have him as your lawyer. One of the cases my dad worked on was called Evans versus Buchanan. It was the desegregation case in Wilmington, Delaware, and it was a very unpopular. It was a very unpopular topic to be in favor of. Dad was representing the Wilmington School Board, which was in favor of desegregation, and a lot of people, particularly white people, were against that. In fact, Joe Biden himself came out against the desegregation, which was something that came up during the 2020 presidential campaign. But my dad really felt that the kids in downtown Wilmington, the Black kids, were getting a poor education. And Dad didn't just believe that Black lives matter. He believed that Black minds matter too, and that their education was really important. He had always wanted to be a judge, and he wasn't really good at playing the politics. That was a perfect example. He wasn't willing to take a popular political position to get the appointment, and so he never got that judicial appointment. And by the end of the 1970s, see if I can get rid of this slide behind me. Give me a second here. There we go, we're a little better here. Nope, that's not much better, but are we okay? And so as we headed into the 1980s, I was going to be going off to college, and my brothers, and he was really starting to think about like what that was going to mean financially. And I think he kind of gave up on his hope of being a judge. So he went to the DuPont company, which I have to say, I think he did enjoy his work there, but it was not as much fun or fulfilling as being a public defender and being a criminal attorney. One of his pastimes during this period, people tell me, your dad seemed like a really quiet guy. And I'll tell you, if you ever sat next to Dad at a Philadelphia Flyers game, you would not say that. Mm-hmm. We saw a side of Dad that you really never saw anywhere else. Language that he would not use around the house. He became very animated when he saw the Flyers play. And I think he liked, they were called the Broad Street Bullies. He was himself, I think, a fighter. And so he kind of identified with him. He really liked that. And I mentioned that he was teaching a class at the University of Delaware. And I didn't take the class, but one of the things I heard about it was he had his students watch the film Dirty Harry and catalog all the constitutional right violations Harry Callahan, the guy played by Clint Eastwood, committed. And that was also, it's a San Francisco movie, and Dad really loved this area. He had a big interest in Northern California. I moved here in the late 1980s. He started coming out here on business trips. And I remember one time he came out and I told him I'd gone skydiving. And he said, "Oh, I've always wanted to do that. Can you arrange for us to go skydiving?" And I said, "I can do that, Dad, but you got to talk to Mom about this. I want to make sure she's okay before we do this." And, we're driving to Lodi. He comes out again. We're driving to Lodi. And I say, "Well, how'd that go with Mom?" He goes, "Oh, I didn't tell her." And I had all this trepidation, like, something's going to happen to my dad, like this Oedipal thing, right? Like Dad's going to have some accident skydiving, but fortunately he was fine. He made a video of the whole thing, which he showed my mom when he got home. He said she started crying from like terror watching Dad do this thing. And he really wanted to move here when he retired from DuPont. It was hard, I think, for my mom. My mom had a lot of dear friends back in Wilmington that she left behind. Dad really kind of socialized through my mother. They were a very united front as parents. They really looked out for each other, but Mom was the one kind of in charge of socializing. And Dad, doing this move really uprooted them. But Mom established new friends when she was out here, and they lived just a few miles from Sarah and I. We'd just gotten married, and it was really great having them. But sadly, a few years after this move, my mom developed lung cancer. And she was kind of fighting for her life, and it wasn't going well. And she told me that she was really concerned about what would happen to my dad. That like it was going to be kind of my responsibility to help him get through this really, really difficult period. And it was a really hard time for the two of us. He was unmoored. I didn't really know what to do to help him. And fortunately, not that long after we lost my mom, Dad met Nancy Smith, my dear stepmother. And this just totally turned his life around. Nancy was a wonderful partner for my dad. I think it's notable that for a generation that saw a lot of divorce, my dad had not one, but two very long, loving, successful marriages. And we had a lot of great times. Nancy and my dad formed a new family. We've had a lot of good times together with the Smiths and the Auerbachs. We would get together for Hanukkah, for for Father's Day. We had a picture up there of Father's Day. And it's been really, really a wonderful family relationship that's developed from that. My dad, he had Alzheimer's, and we just, it started coming on. He was able to function for a while at home, but he was falling. It was really dangerous for him. So Dad eventually went to a place near here, a couple miles, called Sunrise of Burlingame. He moved in December of 2019, which is, of course, you think about the timing, very auspicious, right? So when the pandemic hit, Sunrise did a really great job of protecting their residents. And we're really grateful for that. But there were like months when we couldn't go visit him. And I remember a couple times going down there and standing, outside his window on the street, kind of waving to him, while we were on the phone together. And Dad was in there, he was reading. He continued reading while this was going on. In January of 2021, he got the vaccine shot, one of the early people to get that. But just a week later, he fell. He went to the emergency room, and we believe it's there that he did contract COVID, and it was really bad. And he went downhill really quick. And my brother Randy and I went and visited him in the emergency room, and they had told us like this was the end. We said goodbye to Dad. And, but he's a fighter, right? So he was able to turn that around. He rallied. He was, he recovered. And when he got back to Sunrise, the staff of Sunrise gave him a standing ovation when he came back into the facility. And they would all, it was a very emotional thing, I think, for them to see him like overcome this thing. A month later, he had his 86th birthday, and I put the word out, like, it'd be nice if people send Dad some birthday cards, and he got like 50 birthday cards. You saw some of them in the slideshow, and it really, lifted his spirits, lifted our spirits. And, he continued to like do pretty well at Sunrise. He was still reading his books. He would be in his chair reading his books. And then we started noticing like he's reading the same books he'd read before. Like some of his favorite books from the past, he was rereading them. And then I kind of got the sense like he's not really reading the books. He's got the books, they're around him, he's turning the pages, but he's not really able to read, not really reading, but this was his comfort, right? This is what he did. He loved his books. And a couple months ago, he wasn't really doing that anymore. And that's when I got the sense that he was coming to his last chapter. So some things that my dad liked. He loved Get Smart. That was one of his favorite TV shows. Columbo, Curb Your Enthusiasm. He loved the humor of Larry David. And anything by Mel Brooks. Big, big favorite. He loved family gatherings, but he particularly liked smaller family gatherings. He was an introvert. He didn't like huge affairs. Getting together with Paul and Rhonda Lukoff and their daughters, we'd say that they're not really friends, they're family. And so many great times. They came out here so many times to visit him. Dad loved classical music, especially Beethoven. Gadgets and technology. I think he would get a kick out of the fact that we're doing this hybrid Zoom program for his memorial. But most of all, of course, reading and discussing books. Things my dad didn't like. Anti-Semitism enraged my father. He had really no tolerance for it. I have a memory of going to a rally for Soviet Jews in Washington in the 70s, and there was a man yelling, "Kill the Jews," and my dad went over and punched him hard. And he had experienced anti-Semitism both as a child and in his legal career, and he just could not tolerate it. And I'm sure he'd be very concerned about what we're seeing today. He did not like leaders who believed they were above the law. I think that's why he was so fixated on Dick Nixon. And I have to say that when we get our historic indictment in the weeks ahead, I'll be thinking of my dad. So I was in awe of my father. He defended people charged with terrible crimes that were reviled by other people in the community, but he felt it was his duty to kind of check the power of the state to take away their freedom. He was never afraid to speak his truth. And of course, he was extremely knowledgeable and well-spoken, and also a very good writer. We've got some of his book reviews here, and they're really fun to read. I can't imagine who I would be if I hadn't had him as my father. He really, me and my two brothers, we are all readers. It's super important to who we are. Of course, it was important to who he was. Nancy, my brothers, and I are all very proud of the life he lived. So next, should I turn it back to you, David?
Sure.
And I'll help you with this part of it.
Okay. Thank you, Rodney. There you go. So next we're going to have Paul Lukoff. Paul Lukoff from Dick's. Yeah. Are we there?
So good. I think we can hear them. Go ahead,
Okay.
Paul.
I hope everyone can hear this. Dick was an extraordinary person in my life, and I just want to say a few words. I first met Dick in 1970. He was defending a first-degree murder case, famous in Delaware then for its bizarre facts. A Chinese immigrant was accused of killing and dismembering a prostitute and stuffing the parts in a large suitcase. What stood out from the trial were two things to me. One, Dick's skill using and cross-examining experts. Among Delaware lawyers, defense lawyers, he was probably the best at that. And two, in order to communicate with his client, who only spoke the Fukienese dialect, Dick had to use two Chinese language interpreters, one from Fukienese to Mandarin and the other from Mandarin to English. Somehow, Dick got his client acquitted by reason of insanity. I joined Dick in a two-person law practice in 1973 and was privileged to work directly with him for the next 14 years and to remain his good friend since then, even though we weren't working at the same place. Despite his focus on the law, Dick was a real Renaissance man, an individual with broad talent and expertise. He had a depth of knowledge second to none. He was a very bright and astute practitioner and a challenging opponent. I'm so glad I never had to be his opponent. Those qualities occasionally tested the patience of certain judges. For example, I saw personally two really strange examples of judicial frustration. In a tense first-degree murder case, when Dick took a very creative position relating to the interpretation of a pathology slide, the judge threw a pencil at Dick. Another judge, apparently not appreciating the nuances of Dick's argument in an otherwise mundane case, stood up while Dick was talking and walked out of the courtroom, instructing Dick to just continue talking to an empty chair. You had to be there to appreciate that. In the late 1960s, and for the rest of several decades, American TV audiences were fascinated by a show called Columbo, starring Peter Falk. Columbo was a shrewd but inelegant blue-collar homicide detective whose trademarks included a shambling manner and a rumpled beige raincoat. Dick had a Peter Falk-like stature, could shamble with the best of them, and also wore a rumpled beige raincoat. So people in the Delaware judicial system started calling Dick Columbo. The resemblance was sometimes uncanny. I can easily say that Dick was a gifted mentor, but he didn't tell you what to do. He led by example of how to be a straight shooter, of how to master the subject matter, of how to treat clients, lawyers, judges, witnesses, and court staff with the same courtesy and respect, of how to stand up for what was right in the face of adversity. Can you imagine how lucky I was to have a mentor and a friend like that? Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Keith Cohen from suburban Philadelphia. I am Uncle Dick and Aunt Jackie's nephew. Jackie, my father was Jackie's older brother, Gary, and I wanted to offer a few words. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm an attorney in Philadelphia, and a good reason I'm an attorney here is because of Uncle Dick. As a young person, I had the pleasure to visit Aunt Jack and Uncle Dick and Rodney, Randy, and Reid, and I got to know Uncle Dick a bit. He was like the consummate lawyer, and I remember, you know, as a young person, and you know, I said Philadelphia is a great place. Practicing law seems like a really interesting career. He was such a hard worker. I went to law school at Temple, happens to be Uncle Dick's law school as well. Not a coincidence that I went there. You know, I talked to him about it. It was a great place for me. Number one, I was paying for it. It was a pretty reasonably priced school, but also it had a really good trial advocacy program. I lived in North Philadelphia. Whenever I had a chance to go down to Wilmington, I took advantage of it. If you've ever been to North Philadelphia, you'd understand why. So I went down there a lot of weekends, got to spend time with Aunt Jackie, who always had a wonderful meal for me and was just the most supportive, you know, caring aunt. Uncle Dick would get up on Saturday morning, probably like 5 o'clock to go into work. Couldn't understand that. And when he would come back, I'd say, well, why'd you go so early? He said, well, I've got work to do. It's important I get it done. And my sons aren't going to be up till 11 or 12 o'clock anyway, so they aren't going to miss me. And he was right about that. They, in fact, I think Randy would sleep about 1 o'clock. So he would go on to work, and I learned that work ethic from him. It's, you know, I've been practicing law for 38 years. I still work pretty much every weekend. He always was committed to what he did as a lawyer. He took such great pride in it. He truly was a fighter. You know, I think that, you know, you look back over life, we have control over so little. You know, you kind of roll with it. When, you know, we moved to California and Aunt Jackie got sick and then passed away, I mean, that to me was such a gut punch. But I think the true measure of the man is that he wasn't bitter. He didn't spend the rest of his years angry. he kind of dealt with it. He moved on. He tried to make a life. And I think when you look back over the challenges of life, I mean, that speaks volumes about who he was. And I know I thanked him many times for all the support that I got in practice in law and in growing as a person. And, you know, he was really, he and Aunt Jackie were really wonderful people in my life. And I miss them and appreciate all that they did. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Richard's grandson. I called him Poppy. And I think it's just important to say that he was obviously a very learned and educated man, but both between the law and with all of the historical reading that he did. And I think that's something that was a value that was passed down to all of his offspring and grandchildren. And we hope to all carry on in his legacy in that way. Thank you.
My name is Dave Cohen. I'm another nephew. Oh, sorry. Okay. I'm another one of Dick's nephews, Jackie's middle brother's son. Dick and I had kind of a weird relationship. Dick was kind of a playful person. My first interaction with Dick is something I have no recollection of. I was to be the ring bearer at their wedding. And like a day or two before the wedding, I came down with a fever, which I guess was the mumps or something like that. And so for years, Dick called me Mr. Dependable. My first recollection of Dick was at their house in Wilmington. I think they had a cat, maybe a Siamese cat, and I was chasing the cat. And I chased the cat into, I guess, the library or his office. And I ran in there, and then Dick was in there with the books. And I was just like dumbfounded. I had never seen that many books, even in a library. And I remember making a comment about, have you read all these books? And Dick pointed to a pile that he was next to and said, well, not those. Dick would visit Buffalo on occasion for family events. And we had this thing. Dick may or may not have appreciated Buffalo, but he let me know that his opinion of Buffalo was not that high. And I remember one time he said, if it wasn't for Jackie, I would never come to Buffalo. And so every time he would come to Buffalo, we would have this banter, and I would like try and challenge him. Buffalo has this and that, and he would like knock it all down. And at one point, my mother had urged me to play the piano, and Dick was nearby. And then after I finished playing the piano, Dick made a comment about Buffalo. And then Jackie said, Dick, just cut it out. Just cut it out. And what Dick did was he wouldn't make negative comments about Buffalo, but he'd look at his watch and would go, 73 hours. And that continued on for as long as I can remember. And for my bar mitzvah, they got me a Bulova watch, which lasted until it was dead a long time ago. I threw it away when I moved to Phoenix. When Dick moved to California, he was a different person, like a switch had flipped. When my wife and I were invited to their house in the East Bay, and my wife Ivory and Jackie went off to do something, and it was just Dick and I. And Dick reached into his pocket and said, we've been carrying this around for years. It's time you got it. Here's your money clip from our wedding. And then I asked Dick, what was it with Buffalo? Why did you have this thing against Buffalo? And he said, well, I asked him, did you hate Buffalo? And he said, hate's a strong word. And then, and I asked him, what was it? He said, you were a very introverted kid. This is the only way I could relate to you. And, you know, I got to know a different side of Dick in California. He may have been sarcastic and a wise ass, but he was like a nice guy. And so, you know, and I meant to bring the money clip.
Would anybody else like to share any thoughts? Is there a way to see if anybody online would like to join in?
We don't have any hand raised.
Okay, all right.
They may not approve the instruction.
You
Okay.
ask them if they want to.
Yeah, if anybody online would like to say anything, if you can say something in the chat or raise your hand on Zoom, we can patch you in.
I'll just say a couple of things.
Okay.
Oh, we do have some people in the room that want to talk. Who's?
Well, I have just stand right here to see you. Yeah, so a couple of stories. One is Dick, the nice guy, and he really was a super nice guy. The two of us used to take an older friend out for lunch periodically who was unable to drive. And at one point, I mentioned that I was seeing this fellow once a month. And Dick said, well, I see him every week. You ought to be doing that. And he was a very, very kind man. The other is a book story. Whenever I would see him, he'd point to a pile of books and say, won't you take some? And I'd look at them, maybe stacked about this high, and I'd allow us, maybe I'd get to read some of them, but there was no way I was going to be able to haul them out of the house. I still have a pile of his books, which I'm willing to turn over to the estate. Anyway, he was just, it's one of these times when the cliche, a life well lived, really seems to cover things.
Come on up. Oh, yeah, Nancy.
Hi, I'm Nancy Smith. I'm Dick's second wife. And I knew Dick at a different time of his life. We had both lost our spouses and we found each other. And we had some wonderful years together. We enjoyed traveling. We enjoyed family. He introduced me to classical music. He was the most easygoing guy I could ever hope for. He was flexible. He never argued about going somewhere or being with some people or whatever. He was just terrific. And I'm going to miss him. I really am going to miss him. Alzheimer's is a terrible disease. And it was a very slow decline. And at first, you know, you kind of overlook certain things, and then it gets to a point where you really can't overlook them anymore. And he did reside at Sunrise, and it was a very difficult time because there was COVID and we couldn't visit. But Nancy Reagan once said something about saying goodbye to Ronnie, and she said it was a very long goodbye. And now that Dick is gone, I keep thinking about that. It was like a 3-year goodbye. And I just have to believe that he's in a better place now.
Well, there you go.
Thank you.
We're learning a lot of things about hybrid Zoom events today. And Nancy, I just want to say, you know, my brother Randy and I and Nancy, we were all visiting Dad during these last years. And when Nancy would show up, Dad would just totally brighten up. He just really loved Nancy, and you just brought like this warmth to his life and into our lives too. Do we have anybody else out there Reid.
I just wanted to thank everyone for coming and sharing their remembrances to my father. A lot of this I grew up through, but I didn't really experience. So it's kind of nice to see him through other eyes. One thing, just to echo David's point, I think my father really did become a different person when he moved to California. And I think a lot of it was due to you, Nancy. I think he opened up in a way that he wasn't before. And he was a warmer and more forgiving person and a nicer person. And it was kind of nice to be able to see that towards the end of his life, that he, was just more open to things than he ever was before. And, just a more generous person. And I give you a lot of the credit for that, for opening up that side of him. So thank you. Anybody else? Okay, so I think we're just going to kind of conclude the formal part of the program, but we have lots of good snacks and munchies, and we can all talk and look at some of the books and some of the memorabilia that really Dick shared with us, and we can share our connection with him. So thank you very much for everybody coming and sharing this together with us, and we'll hang out for a little bit. Thank you.